As I was finishing up this video, I saw another interview with Motokura and Takahashi on La Vanguardia. This is translated from Japanese to Spanish and then to English through Google Translate, so I can't speak for the accuracy of the quotes, but I'll just pick out a couple of interesting things that I found in there. Apologies for no text on screen as time is against me. First of all, just for fun, Motokura explains Bananza, and he says it is a play on words that combines banana, the favourite fruit of Donkey Kong, and Bananza, which can mean prosperity or fortune. In the game, it also has a concrete meaning since when Donkey Kong transforms, we call it Bananza transformation, and we use the word Bananza to refer to that ability. End quote. I always find it interesting when the Nintendo developers use English words as part of their development aims, since of course the translation can't be completely perfect, and I always wonder exactly what their perception of a word like Bananza might be. Also interesting is Motokura expanding on a theme from the other interview by saying of Miyamoto's involvement, yes, we let him play it and asked him several things. For example, we asked him about his original ideas of the character. In the first creation of Donkey Kong, Miyamoto imagined a world where Donkey Kong and humans coexist. That is why, in addition to the wildest image of the jungle, we have also incorporated that urban vision and aesthetics with which Miyamoto created the character. End quote. They also confirmed that Minecraft was not an influence on the development of this game, and as for the long wait for Donkey Kong at all, Motokura reflects, it's a difficult question. At Nintendo, we create many types of games, and we always think about what fits best for the type of experience we want to develop at all times. We felt that this was the right time to develop this game. He also confirms, when asked about the beginning of the development, although it cannot give you very precise details, I can tell you that we started developing it after finishing Super Mario Odyssey in 2017. This would make sense of it originally being a Switch title, and indeed might make sense of the concept that it was originally DLC that went bananas, much like Tears of the Kingdom, ultimately outgrew DLC and became its own title. Takahashi also discusses frame drops, saying several factors must be taken into account. First of all, we have intentionally used effects such as stop and slow motion to emphasize the impacts. On the other hand, when using voxel technology, there are times when there are great changes and destruction in the scenario. We are aware that at any time this performance may drop a little. However, as you say, in general the game can be enjoyed fluidly, and at the point where large-scale changes occur, we have given priority to fun and gameplay. End quote. Both gentlemen also share their reflections on their experiences with the early Donkey Kong games. Says Motokura, the first time I played Donkey Kong on Game & Watch, what impressed me the most was that the game took place in a city that looked a lot like New York, and that the characters responded very well to the player's movement. Also, when I was a student, I played Donkey Kong Country. Years later, I worked on the development of Donkey Kong Jungle Beat as a character artist, and I was in charge of modeling and animation. Takahashi says, in my case, although I had no previous experience working in Donkey Kong games, I do have very good memories of playing Donkey Kong Jr. and later Donkey Kong Country. When I knew that I had been assigned to the Donkey Kong Bonanza team, I played all the games in the franchise again. In particular, Donkey Kong Country introduced unique mechanics such as barrel guns and mine wagons. I wanted to take back those elements and add the component of destruction. That motivated me to include memories of the past along with new ideas. End quotes. Okay, so that was a brief tour through this new interview that appeared, and now on with the main video. With a big Donkey Kong revived to banana-themed glory in Donkey Kong Bonanza, what future is there going to be for the wider Kong family? What potential could there be for new spin-offs, and how might Nintendo seek to utilize the wider Kong family going forward? Firstly, a big thanks to Thomas GamesDocs for highlighting to me in the comments of my previous video focused on the IGN Donkey Kong Bonanza interview that there were additional interviews that came off embargo at the same time between Motokura and Takahashi and Rolling Stone and The Verge. I won't do a line by line on these as I don't think there's much to say except for some references relevant to the topic of this video to the peripheral Kongs. Motokura says of them, one thing I wanted to make sure we definitely included was Cranky Kong. Maybe it's just because I'm a fan personally, but I wanted to make sure he was included. Takahashi also made the comment, maybe you'll see more of Diddy in the future, although because Rolling Stone don't give context, it's difficult to really discern whether this reads as some sly Aonuma-style tease or just a shrug of the shoulders. I do think that there's something interesting about making Pauline the default side character as opposed to Diddy or Dixie or Cranky, in that it creates an audience representation character for the Kong universe. This is explicitly one of the benefits that the game developers appear to have sought her for, but just as it applies to games, it also makes me think that that character has potential to serve the same or a similar role in a film context if and when there's a Donkey Kong film, which, assuming the films stay successful, has felt locked on since the announcement of Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong at this point. I think a Donkey Kong film announcement by the end of 2027 feels like a 50% chance. However, in this case, what would happen to the erstwhile gang, and notably Diddy, who had a brief period of being one of the most iconic of the Nintendo great apes, with Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest and Diddy Kong Racing arriving within a couple of years? What is the likelihood that Donkey Kong's Nintendo Cap nephew could rocket to the lead of his own title once again? A flat-out revival of Diddy Kong Racing or similar feels unlikely, with Rare no longer around, although the fact that the game has yet to be put on Nintendo Switch Online, and the fact that Nintendo did revive a niche title with a third-party involvement in the form of Super Mario RPG does make it feel a little, and I do mean a little, more possible. If Mario Kart is to be a once-per-generation title, Nintendo may feel that they would like to try and see if the Mario universe can support some alternative races, and Diddy's name recognition may be helpful in this regard. However, there are some problems with this. For one thing, Diddy Kong Racing was originally a non-franchise entry developed by Rare called Wild Cartoon Kingdom, and then Adventure Racers, and then Pro Am 64, and director Lee Schuneman was quoted in Games TM saying there was no specific force saying make it like this or like that. There was no involvement from Nintendo in terms of content. It was the game we wanted to make. It was, of course, a Miyamoto decision to put Diddy into the title, and only then for commercial reasons. Nintendo's approach seems to be to get under the skin of what makes a character work and what makes the series truly resonate with an audience. And without the key people to discuss this with, the only way I could see Diddy coming back is if one of the development staff wanted to relaunch this as an external pitch, which seems a difficult call nearly 3 decades on. In which case, how would we get more Diddy Kong? Well, seemingly, judging by the way that Nintendo have handled other such franchises, there are 2 ways that this might happen. Captain Toad received a spin-off title because it became clear that the character had a cool game mechanic and could make for a small side game of the sort that was quick to develop, but which helpfully filled a slot in the, at that point, rather anemic Wii U library. The other way is the way Bananza seems to have started, with an instruction from above in the form of Koizumi. Are there any possibilities for either of these to happen? Well, we know that Diddy is in Donkey Kong Bonanza, but Captain Toad's unique playstyle was essentially built into Super Mario 3D World, so the spin-off was a far more logical next step in that situation. Diddy has several difficulties as a lead character compared with Donkey Kong as well. He doesn't have the same physical reach or strength, and so fundamentally playing as Diddy might not feel drastically different from Pauline, who has the more interesting singing abilities to deploy. We know that Nintendo likes to start from the feel of a game and the gameplay experience, and it strikes me that Cranky's Uncle Scrooge style pogo sticking has more potential, and even then that's thin gruel compared to the wealth of interesting options afforded by a core mechanic like the destructible terrain in Bonanza or the capture mechanic in Mario Odyssey. The other option is a command from above to come, bringing Diddy into the spotlight. And sure, Diddy has the potential to be pretty popular. He's kind of secondary to DK, but if DK has his profile raised, Diddy is an obvious character to benefit from the broader spotlight. I also think it's a very significant point that the Kongs are a family. Yes, Mario has a brother and a love interest, but most Nintendo characters exist more or less solo. The fact that the Kongs exist as a family strikes me as a source of huge, untapped potential because Nintendo explicitly model themselves as making family games, and their major market for the films in America has a particularly strong interest in the family market. If you want to find a way for the DKIP to stand apart from the rest, it's not Donkey Kong's strength or the barrels or even the gameplay style. To me, it's the fact that Donkey Kong can resonate and provoke sympathy with anyone who's had a crazy extended family of troublemakers. I think if and when the film or TV series emerge, this is the angle that will be taken. And if this is the case, we now have the audience identification characters for both sons and daughters in terms of the young Diddy and Pauline. And yes, I know they aren't literally Donkey Kong's son and daughter, I'm just talking about how they serve the franchise in terms of representing an iconic role. Nintendo often likes to tout itself as a great vehicle for multi-generational gaming, and with Game Chat, this should theoretically be even easier, with even older and much younger players being able to access chat functionality that connects them together. The next stage, therefore, is to have a game that fits in with this multi-generational approach. Now, I'm not quite sure what that could be, but my sense is that it would be closer to the party genre of Mario Party than a kind of core audience title. I don't think it could serve the exact same audience as Mario Party itself, which is a huge success, and they won't want to carve up that audience. Even Amiibo Festival had the Amiibo angle to it to slightly differentiate it. As an example of the kind of thing that I could imagine, since many Nintendo games come from childhood play, whether Zelda being from wandering the Kyoto Hills, Pokemon from bug collecting, and Mario Kart from go-karting, it strikes me that some kind of virtual talent show using the Kongs would be ideal. Dancing with Cranky, singing with Pauline, bongo bashing with DK, and perhaps other options such as pulling yoga poses. The range of humorous character types allow for most people to find a Kong that seems to represent their own personality. In any event, something that centers on the family dynamic of the Kongs and uses this to appeal to families feels like an open door. Of course, in this sense, it makes far less sense to spin Diddy or Dixie or Cranky or any individual Kong off, as the benefit of the character from a commercial point of view becomes how he services the expanded Kong universe. Now, that's not to say it's impossible. WarioWare is a good example of where Nintendo had a character that they could use with a new concept and bring in a kind of twist, but I'm not sure they really want Diddy to be separated out from the herd in this way. The one character with real breakout potential, of course, seems to me to be Pauline. I've long thought that a Pauline-based game made a lot of sense given how well she differentiated herself from the likes of Peach and Daisy in Super Mario Odyssey, and the singing mechanic isn't just one that has great potential, but one that, from the sounds of rumours coming out of Retro Studios, the company has explored utilising before. With the Switch 2's built-in microphone, it feels like there's more potential than ever to push Pauline into the spotlight, and it will be consistent with the way that they've tried to seize the young girls market by putting Peach and Zelda into the leads of their own titles in the last year or so. Still, it's early days for the Donkey Kong revival. I think given the baseline frequency of new Donkey Kong material, I'd expect 50% a new Donkey Kong title of some description before the end of 2027, even if it's just a Nintendo Switch 2 edition with Plus game for Tropical Freeze. But I think a Donkey Kong spin-off with a different lead in the same period is maybe only a 10% chance. However, I do expect to see a lot more made of, in particular, Diddy, Cranky, and Pauline, even if it's not in the form of their own games. For now, though, happy Bananza to everybody. If you like, subscribe and check out the Patreon, I'd really appreciate it, but otherwise, I'm just so happy you're here, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.